The galaxy knew humans as the gentle ones. For 200 years, since the day they joined the Galactic Concord, humanity had been the species that built hospitals on dying worlds, that sent food ships into war zones, that sat at the negotiating table long after every other species had walked away. They were the ones who showed up first when a planet flooded, or a star flickered, or a plague swept through a colony. They asked for nothing in return. They simply helped. When they first joined the Concord, humanity had done something that no species had ever done before. They disarmed. Willingly. Completely. They dismantled their warships, shut down their weapons factories, and decommissioned the terrible machines they had once built to kill. They did it as a gesture of trust. A promise. The galaxy had watched in amazement, and then, slowly, it had begun to forget what humans used to be. Captain Marin Voss stood on the bridge of the UHCS Olive Branch and watched the stars slide past the viewport. The Olive Branch was a humanitarian cruiser. It had no guns. It had no shields worth mentioning. What it had were 12 cargo bays full of medical supplies, a surgical wing that could handle 300 patients, and a crew of 94 people who had signed up to help strangers. They were on their way to a Vithari border world called Sokran 3. A plague had broken out there. The Vithari Dominion had not asked for help. They never asked for help, but people were dying, and Marin's crew did not wait for invitations. "Captain," said her first officer, a tall woman named Priya, "Vethari Border Patrol is hailing us. They want to know why we are entering their space." "Tell them we are delivering medical supplies," Marin said. "Tell them we come in peace and we carry no weapons." Priya smiled a little. "They probably already scanned us and know that. Then tell them anyway. It is polite." That was the human way. Always polite, always open, always offering a hand even when the other side carried a blade. Far away, on the great station that housed the Concord High Council, Ambassador Joran Hale sat in his office and read reports. He was 63 years old. He had spent 30 of those years serving as humanity's voice in the galaxy. He had negotiated 14 peace treaties. He had talked 3 species out of wars that would have killed billions. He believed, with every fiber of his being, that words were stronger than weapons. On his desk was a report about Vethari fleet movements. Their ships were gathering near the border. Hundreds of them. Military analysts from 6 different species had flagged it as unusual. Hale had brought it before the council twice. Both times, the council had voted to monitor the situation. Monitor. That was their favorite word. It meant doing nothing while appearing to do something. Hale rubbed his eyes. He was tired. But he trusted the system. He had given his life to this system. It was slow, yes. It was frustrating, yes. But it worked. It had kept the peace for centuries. It would keep the peace now. He told himself that. He almost believed it. On the other side of the border, aboard the Vithari command ship Fang of Worlds, Warlord Skethran stood before a massive display that showed the positions of every human colony within striking distance. He was tall, even for a Vithari. His exoskeleton was dark as burnt iron. His 4 eyes moved independently, studying the map with the cold focus of a predator watching prey. The Vithari were an insectoid species. They were strong, fast, and they had built their empire on conquest. They respected only power, and in their eyes, the humans had none. "Look at them," Skethran said to his officers. "They send unarmed ships into our space. They carry medicine instead of missiles. They bare their throat and call it virtue." His second in command, a scarred warrior named Vreth, clicked her mandibles. "They were not always this way, Warlord. The old records say they were dangerous once." "Once," Skethran said, and the word dripped with contempt. "Once they had claws. Now they have filed them down to nothing. A species that chooses to forget how to fight has chosen to die. They simply do not know it yet." He turned from the map. His decision was already made. It had been made months ago. The fleet was almost ready. The target was already chosen. On Sokran 3, the Olive Branch landed at the only spaceport the Vithari would allow them to use. It was small, dirty, and far from the worst-hit areas. The Vithari were not making this easy. They never did. Marin did not complain. She organized her teams, loaded the supplies onto ground vehicles, and drove them 6 hours through hostile terrain to reach the affected settlements. When they arrived, they found Vithari civilians dying in the streets. The local authorities had done almost nothing. Her crew set up field hospitals. They worked for 3 days straight. They saved over 4,000 lives. Vithari lives. The lives of a species that openly hated them. On the third night, as Marin was packing up the last of the equipment, a Vithari officer approached her. He was young, with pale green chitin, and eyes that had not yet learned to hide what they felt. He looked at the human woman who had just spent 3 days saving his people, and something complicated moved behind his gaze. "Why?" he asked. "Why do you do this? We are not your allies. We do not like you. Why do you help us?" Marin looked at him for a long moment. "Because you needed it," she said. "That is reason enough." The officer stared at her. Then he shook his head slowly. "You carry no weapons. You bare your throat and call it virtue. One day, something will bite." Marin smiled. It was a patient smile, a kind smile, the smile of a species that had chosen, every single day for 200 years, to be better than what it was. "Maybe," she said, "but not today." She walked back to her ship. The olive branch lifted off from Sokran 3 and turned toward home. Behind them, the Vethari officer watched the unarmed ship disappear into the dark sky, and he felt something he did not understand. It might have been gratitude. It might have been pity. On Mars, deep underground, behind doors that had not been opened in 2 centuries, a red light blinked in the darkness. It had been blinking since the day the doors were sealed. A heartbeat, patient, steady, waiting. Nobody talked about what was behind those doors. Nobody needed to. Not yet. Across human space, the children went to school, the doctors went to work. The diplomats wrote their letters and attended their meetings. The stars were bright. The peace was holding. And 18 million people on a beautiful world called Elisara 4 went to sleep that night without knowing that they had 17 days left to live. The sky above Elisara 4 broke open at dawn. There was no warning, no declaration of war, no final demand or ultimatum. One moment the sky was pink and gold with the light of a rising sun, and the next it was full of ships. 300 Vithari warships dropped out of faster-than-light travel, in perfect formation directly above the planet. They filled the sky from horizon to horizon, blocking out the light like a swarm of iron locusts. The first bombs fell before anyone on the ground understood what was happening. Elisara 4 was one of humanity's most beautiful worlds. 18 million humans lived there, along with 3 million aliens from dozens of species who had come to study, to work, to live among a people known for their kindness. The planet was home to the greatest xenocultural university in the galaxy, where students from 40 different species studied side by side. It had a medical center that treated patients from across the sector, regardless of species, regardless of ability to pay. It had no military base, no defense grid, no warships in orbit, not even a single armed satellite. There was nothing to defend it, because it was never supposed to need defending. It was a place of learning and healing, a place of peace. The Vethari did not care. The orbital bombardment lasted 9 hours. 9 hours of fire falling from the sky without pause. The capital city was hit first. Buildings that had stood for 100 years were turned to ash in seconds. The university was struck directly. It was the middle of the academic year. The lecture halls were full. Thousands of students from dozens of species died in the first wave, buried under rubble that burned so hot it turned sand to glass. The medical center was hit next. The Vithari targeted it deliberately. Later, intercepted communications would show that Warlord Skethrin had marked it as a priority target. He wanted the humans to know that their mercy would not protect them, that the places where they healed others would become their graves. Evacuation ships tried to launch. Civilian transports, passenger shuttles, anything that could fly. The Vithari shot them down one by one. They did not even bother to confirm whether the ships were armed. They knew they were not. They shot them down anyway. Burning wreckage rained back down on the cities below, adding fire to fire, death to death. After the bombardment, the ground troops came. Vethari shock soldiers landed in waves across the planet's surface. They moved through the ruins with methodical cruelty, hunting survivors. They called it a cleansing exercise. They treated it like practice. 12.4 million humans died on Elisara 4. Another 2.1 million aliens died alongside them. Students, doctors, children, families. Burned, buried, hunted, and killed on a world that had never raised a weapon against anyone. Warlord Skethran stood on the bridge of his command ship and watched the world burn beneath him. He opened a channel to every frequency in the galaxy, and he spoke. Let this serve as demonstration. The humans are weak. They chose to forget how to fight. Now they learn the price. Let every species in the Concord see what happens to those who mistake softness for strength. He closed the channel. He felt nothing. To him, this was simply the natural order. The strong consume the weak. The humans had made themselves weak. This was the result. Captain Marin Voss was 2 days out from Elisara when the distress signal reached the olive branch. The signal was fragmented, broken, barely coherent, but the words were clear enough. Under attack. Orbital bombardment. Millions dead. Please help. Please. Someone. Anyone. Marin diverted immediately. Her crew pushed the engines beyond their limits. They arrived 14 hours later, long after the Vethari fleet had gone. What they found broke them. The planet was burning. Entire cities were just gone. Where the capital had been, there was a crater so wide you could see it from orbit. Smoke covered half the continent. The air was thick with ash and the smell of things that should never burn. Marin took a shuttle down to the surface. She landed near what had been the medical center. It was rubble now, twisted metal and shattered concrete and silence. Her crew spread out, searching for survivors. They found some, not many. Marin worked with her bare hands. She pulled broken stone away from collapsed shelters. She carried wounded people on her back. She did not sleep for 36 hours. And somewhere in the ruins of the children's wing of the hospital, she found a small girl. The girl was dead. She had been dead for hours. She was lying on her side with her arms curled around a stuffed toy, as if she had been sleeping when the world ended. She was maybe 6 years old. She had dark hair and small hands, and she was gone. Marin sat down next to her. She picked up the child's hand and held it, and she stayed there for a very long time. Across the galaxy, Ambassador Joran Hale watched the footage from Elisara in the Concord Council chamber. He watched it with 400 representatives of 400 species. The chamber was silent. The footage spoke for itself. When it was over, Hale stood. His hands were shaking, but his voice was not. 12 million of my people are dead, he said, murdered, on a world that carried no weapons and posed no threat. I am asking this council to act, not to condemn, not to sanction, to act, to send a fleet, to hold the Vethari accountable, to show the galaxy that this will not stand. The debate lasted 6 hours. 6 hours of speeches and procedures and parliamentary maneuvers, while the ashes of Elisara were still warm. In the end, the council voted. They issued a formal condemnation. They imposed economic sanctions. They expressed deep concern. They did nothing. Several species approached Hale privately afterward. They expressed sympathy. They said they were sorry. They said they wished they could do more. But the Vethari fleet was large, and their own worlds were close to Vethari space, and they could not risk it. They were sorry. They were so sorry. Hale stood in the empty council chamber after everyone had left. The lights were dim. The seats were empty. He looked at the podium where he had spoken, at the chair where he had sat for 30 years, and he understood something that he had spent his entire life refusing to believe. The system did not work. It had never worked. It was a beautiful idea built on the assumption that everyone shared the same values, and they did not. Some species looked at kindness and saw opportunity. Some species looked at peace and saw weakness. And no amount of words would change that. He sat down heavily. He felt old. He felt broken. He felt something dark and ancient stirring in his chest. Something that 200 years of civilization had tried to bury. On the surface of Elisara 4, Marin Voss still sat in the ruins. She had gently closed the little girl's eyes. She had learned her name from a surviving nurse. Lyra. Her name was Lyra. She was 6. She liked stars. Marin's communicator buzzed. She looked at it. It was a message from Earth, from the Commonwealth Parliament. An emergency session had been called. Every living human across every world was being asked a single question. She read the question on her screen, and something shifted behind her eyes. The softness did not leave. The compassion did not disappear. But something else rose up beside it. Something old. Something that humanity had locked away in the deepest parts of itself 200 years ago, hoping it would never be needed again. She looked down at the dead child. She memorized her face. Then she stood up, wiped the dust from her hands, and spoke her answer into the calm. Yes. Across human space, on every colony, on every station, on every ship, the answer was the same. Whispered in hospitals, shouted in town squares, typed quietly in living rooms by people who had never raised a hand in anger in their lives. Yes. Shall we remember what we are? Yes. God help us all. Yes. The vote was counted in less than 12 hours. Across every human world, every station, every outpost, every ship, the answer came back the same. 97.4%. Yes. It was the largest unified vote in human history. There was no celebration. There was no cheering. People voted quietly, with steady hands and heavy hearts, and then they went to work. The Lazarus Protocol had been written 200 years ago, on the same day humanity chose to disarm. It was the failsafe, the thing nobody wanted to talk about. The document that began with the words, "In the event that peace fails and our people face extinction, the following measures shall be enacted." It had been sealed, encrypted, and buried in the deepest vaults of the Commonwealth archives. Every generation of leaders had been told about it. Every generation had prayed they would never need it. On Mars, beneath the red desert, a door opened for the first time in 2 centuries. The door was 3 meters thick and made of an alloy that the Concorde had never seen, because humanity had never shared it. Behind it was a tunnel that stretched downward for over a kilometer. At the bottom of the tunnel was a cavern so large that it had its own weather system. And inside the cavern, row after row after row, stretching into the distance like a metal forest, were warships. Thousands of them. Dreadnoughts the size of small cities. Carrier groups that could launch 10,000 fighters each. Stealth corvettes that could slip through any sensor net in the galaxy. Siege platforms designed to crack open the defenses of entire worlds. All of them maintained by automated systems. All of them fueled, armed, and ready. Waiting. For 200 years, they had been waiting. Humanity had told the galaxy they destroyed their weapons. They had lied. They had lied with a smile and a handshake and the full knowledge that someday the smile might not be enough. Across human space, similar doors were opening. On Luna, on Titan, on colonies so remote that even the Concorde did not know they existed. Everywhere, the machines of war were waking up. On Earth, the war colleges reopened overnight. Buildings that had been turned into museums and schools were cleared out in hours. Tactical artificial intelligences that had been officially retired were brought back online from encrypted backups that were never actually deleted. Combat doctrines that humanity had supposedly forgotten were restored, studied, and updated with 2 centuries of new technology. It turned out that humans had never forgotten how to fight. They had simply chosen not to. And there was a very important difference between the two. The galaxy began to notice the changes almost immediately. Not because of the warships. Those were still hidden, still being prepared. The galaxy noticed because the humans started leaving. Every human diplomat in the Concorde resigned on the same day. Every human doctor serving on alien worlds recalled themselves. Every human teacher, engineer, aid worker, and disaster response specialist quietly packed their things and went home. There were no angry speeches, no accusations. They simply left. And the galaxy felt it. On the Lyrithan homeworld, 3 hospitals that depended on human medical staff suddenly had no doctors. On the Prelian trade routes, human negotiators who had kept fragile peace agreements alive for decades were simply gone. On a dozen border worlds, Human disaster response teams that had been the only thing standing between millions of aliens and starvation disappeared overnight. The humans had been woven into the fabric of galactic civilization so deeply that pulling them out left holes everywhere. The Concord Council demanded answers. They sent messages. They made threats. They pleaded. Humanity did not respond. Ambassador Joran Hale responded. One last time. He walked into the council chamber, wearing his formal diplomatic uniform for the final time. The chamber was full. Every seat was taken. Every eye was on him. The room was so silent that you could hear the hum of the station's air system. Hale walked to the podium. He looked out at the assembled representatives of 400 species. He saw fear in some of their eyes, confusion in others. A few showed guilt. Most showed nothing at all. He spoke calmly. He did not raise his voice. 200 years ago, we came to this council and we made a choice. We chose to put down our weapons. We chose to be healers, builders, and peacemakers. We chose to be the species that helped, not the species that conquered. And for 200 years, we kept that promise. We kept it when it was easy. And we kept it when it was hard. We kept it when your own species broke their promises. And we still showed up to help you rebuild. He paused. The chamber was absolutely still. We showed you who we wished to be. For 200 years that was enough. But you let them kill our children. You watched it happen. Some of you had the power to stop it. All of you had the power to respond. And you chose to write a letter. He reached up and removed his diplomatic sash. The silver fabric caught the light as he folded it carefully and placed it on the podium. You are about to meet who we have always been. He turned and walked out. He did not look back. Behind him, the chamber erupted into chaos. But Hale did not hear it. He was already gone. Humanity's seat in the Concorde was left empty, and no one dared to touch the folded sash he had left behind. In the days that followed, alien intelligence services scrambled to understand what was happening. They pulled old files on human history, pre-Concorde history, the files that humanity had shared openly when they joined, but that nobody had ever bothered to read carefully, because why would you? The humans were the gentle ones. What could their history possibly contain? On a Lyrathan intelligence station, a senior analyst named Korath was assigned to compile a threat assessment. He started reading. He read about the world wars. He read about nuclear weapons. He read about a single bomb that destroyed an entire city in a flash of light. He read about the death camps. He read about the long centuries of conflict that had shaped the human species like a hammer shapes iron. He read about something called mutually assured destruction, a period in human history where the species had pointed enough weapons at itself to end all life on its planet, and then just lived like that for decades, staring across the edge of annihilation every single day. He read about the gene soldier programs, the autonomous weapons, the kill drones that could hunt individual targets across continents, the biological weapons that could be tailored to specific genetic profiles. Korath stopped reading. He sat at his desk for a long time. His hands were shaking. His assistant came in and asked if he was all right. They killed 50 million of their own kind in a single war, Korath said quietly. Not across centuries. In 6 years. Over ideology. And then they built weapons that could kill everyone. And then they got better at it. He looked up. And that was before they reached space. His assistant said nothing. We have been living next to them for 200 years, Korath said. We watched them build hospitals and teach our children and heal our sick, and we thought that was what they were. But that is what they chose to be. This is what they are. On Mars, Captain Marin Voss walked into a military outfitting station. She was not wearing her humanitarian uniform anymore. She had folded it and placed it in a box, just as Hale had folded his sash, gently, with respect. But firmly, a technician fitted her for combat armor. It was black, angular, and heavy. It felt like wearing a promise. What name do you want on your ship, Admiral? The technician asked. The promotion had come through that morning. They were promoting anyone with command experience. They were promoting fast. There was no time for ceremony. Marin touched the bracelet on her wrist, a small bracelet with a name engraved on it. Lyra. The 6-year-old girl who liked stars. Name it after her, Marin said. The technician nodded and wrote it down. Outside the station, through a viewport that looked out across the Martian shipyards, Marin could see them. Warships, hundreds of them, rising from the underground vaults like dark birds lifting from a nest. They blocked out the stars as they climbed into formation. More were coming. Every hour, more were coming. 200 years of peace. 200 years of choosing to be kind. And behind it all, behind every smile, and every helping hand, and every unarmed ship sent into hostile space, humanity had kept the wolf locked in the basement. Fed it, maintained it, kept it sharp. Now the wolf was awake, and it was hungry. The human war fleet launched on a Tuesday. 10,000 warships rose from hidden docks across human space, in perfect synchronization. Not a single vessel launched early. Not a single vessel launched late. They moved as one, like a heartbeat, like a fist closing. The fleet split into strike groups and jumped to faster than light speed, and within an hour, every single one of them had vanished from human space. The galaxy held its breath. Warlord Skethran had expected retaliation. He had planned for it. He had positioned his fleets along the border in a defensive wall of 2,000 warships, backed by orbital fortresses and minefields that stretched across entire star systems. He had prepared kill zones, ambush points, and fallback positions. His strategists had run simulations. They estimated that the humans, even with hidden reserves, could not break through the border defenses in less than 6 months. The humans did not attack the border. On the first day, at exactly the same moment across 100 star systems, human stealth ships that no sensor in the galaxy could detect appeared behind Vithari lines. They had been there for days, waiting silently in the dark spaces between stars. On a single command, they struck the Vithari communication network. Every relay station, every signal hub, every command frequency, all of it went dark in 11 minutes. The entire Vithari dominion was cut off from itself. Ships could not talk to stations. Stations could not talk to command. Warlord Skethran, sitting on his command ship behind his impenetrable border wall, suddenly could not reach a single one of his forces. He was shouting orders into silence. On the second day, the human fleet appeared inside Vithari core space. Not at the border, not pushing through the defensive wall. Inside, behind everything. The humans had used short-range jump technology that the Concord did not know existed to bypass the entire border in a single leap. They materialized in the heart of the Dominion, like ghosts stepping through a locked door. The Vithari border fleet, the 2,000 warships that Skethran had positioned so carefully, was now facing the wrong direction. By the time they turned around, it was already over. What followed was not a war. Wars have two sides. This was a disassembly. Human tactical artificial intelligences coordinated the entire campaign. Every engagement was planned, calculated, and executed with a precision that made the watching galaxy feel physically sick. The AIs processed information thousands of times faster than any living mind. They found weaknesses in Vethari formations before the Vethari knew the weaknesses existed. They predicted enemy movements before the enemy decided to move. The Vithari had the fourth largest fleet in the galaxy. They had spent decades building it. They were proud of it. It was destroyed in 8 days. Human dreadnoughts tore through Vithari battle groups like a blade through cloth. The Vithari ships were strong by galactic standards. They had thick armor, powerful weapons, and crews that were born for combat. It did not matter. The human ships were something else entirely. They absorbed hits that would have crippled Concord vessels and kept firing. Their weapons cut through Vithari armor, as if it were paper. Their shields regenerated faster than the Vethari could drain them. A Vithari admiral named Threx commanded a defense fleet of 300 ships at the Vithari industrial world of Korath. She was experienced, brilliant, and unafraid. She arranged her fleet in a classic Vithari crescent formation and waited for the human ships to engage. The humans sent 40 ships, 40 against 300. Threx thought it was a mistake. It was not. In 90 minutes, her entire fleet was gone. Every ship disabled or destroyed. The 40 human vessels took minor damage. They did not even slow down. On the ground, it was the same. Human soldiers landed on Vathari military worlds in drop pods that hit the surface like thunder. They were augmented, stronger than any baseline human, faster, wrapped in armor that could stop a plasma bolt and keep moving. Behind them came the drones, thousands of autonomous machines that moved in swarms, clearing buildings and destroying weapons emplacements with surgical accuracy. The Vathari were fierce warriors. On any other day, against any other enemy, they would have fought well. But they had prepared to fight the humans they knew. The soft ones. The kind ones. The ones who sent unarmed ships and smiled when you insulted them. These were not those humans. These humans did not smile. They did not speak. They moved through Vathari positions like a wave through sand, and when they passed, there was nothing left. Not a single functioning military installation. Not a single weapons factory. Not a single command bunker. But they did not bomb cities. They did not target civilians. They did not burn crops or poison water or do any of the 1,000 terrible things they could have done. They were precise. They destroyed only military targets. They killed only those who fought. When Vathari soldiers surrendered, they were taken prisoner and treated according to the old human laws of war. This was not mercy. This was something worse. This was a message. We could destroy everything. We are choosing not to. Notice the difference. The Concorde sent observation ships to watch from a distance. They were terrified, but they needed to see. What they saw terrified them more. A Concorde observer, a Prelian captain named Sohn, watched a human carrier group dismantle an entire Vathari star fortress in less than 2 hours. The fortress had been considered the strongest fixed position in Vathari space. It had taken 30 years to build. How is this possible? Sohn whispered. His science officer ran the numbers 3 times. Their weapons technology is at least 300 years ahead of anything in the Concorde database. Maybe more. They have been advancing in secret the entire time they were part of the Concorde. They were building weapons while they were building our hospitals, Sohn said. No, his science officer said quietly. They built the weapons first, long before they joined the Concorde. They just never stopped improving them. On day 15, Warlord Skethran gathered his remaining forces at the Vathari throne world. It was the last stronghold. Everything else was gone. He had maybe 400 ships left, most of them damaged. He knew he could not win. But he was Vathari. He would fight. He would die in battle. That was the only honorable end. He stood on his bridge and gave a speech to his remaining warriors. He spoke of Vathari strength, Vathari pride, Vathari destiny. His warriors roared in response. The human fleet arrived 3 hours later. 2,000 warships, led by the flagship Elisara's Memory. Admiral Marin Voss stood on the bridge, looking at the Vathari formation on her tactical display. She felt nothing. No rage, no satisfaction. Just a cold, clear purpose, like a surgeon preparing to cut. The battle lasted 4 hours. The Vathari fought hard. They fought bravely. It did not matter. When it was over, Skethran's command ship was the last vessel still functional. Human boarding parties cut through its hull. Marines moved through the corridors, clearing resistance with quiet efficiency. They reached the bridge. Skethran was waiting for them. He stood in the center of his bridge with his blade drawn. He was ready to die. He wanted to die. A warrior's death was all he had left. Admiral Voss walked through the door. She was shorter than him by a full meter. She wore black armor scarred by plasma burns. She looked up at the warlord who had killed 12 million of her people, and she did not draw her weapon. "You do not get to die in battle," she said. "You get to watch." Skethran was taken alive. He screamed, he fought, he begged for death. It was not given. The Concorde sent desperate messages, demanding that humanity stand down. They invoked treaties, laws, and protocols. The human fleet did not respond. Every communication channel played a single recorded message on loop to anyone who hailed them. "We are busy." On day 19, the last Vathari military installation was dismantled. The war, if it could be called that, was over. Aboard the Prelian observation ship, Captain Sohn stood on his bridge and stared at the tactical display. 19 days. From first strike to total victory. 19 days to completely destroy the fourth most powerful military in the galaxy. His first officer stood beside him, trembling. 19 days, she said. They did this in 19 days. Sohn did not look away from the display. His voice was barely a whisper, and they were not even angry. This was just procedure. In the silence of space, the human fleet held position around the Vithari throne world. 10,000 warships, barely scratched, floating in perfect formation, waiting for new orders. And across the galaxy, 400 species looked at their allies, their neighbors, the gentle species that had healed their sick and taught their children, and they understood. They had never been living beside a friend. They had been living beside a monster that had chosen to be kind, and the monster was awake. The Vithari Dominion did not fall. It was taken apart, piece by piece, like a machine being stripped for parts. Human administrators moved into Vithari space within days of the war's end. They did not come as conquerors. They came as engineers. They divided the former Dominion into 12 autonomous zones, each one governed by local Vithari civilian councils under human oversight. Military installations that had not already been destroyed were dismantled. Weapons factories were converted into manufacturing plants for civilian goods. The Vithari war fleet, or what remained of it, was melted down and used to build infrastructure. War criminals were identified, tracked, and arrested. Thousands of them. Every officer who had participated in the attack on Elisara 4. Every commander who had given orders to fire on evacuation ships. Every pilot who had bombed civilian targets. They were tried in courts that followed human legal traditions stretching back centuries. The trials were fair. The evidence was overwhelming. The sentences were severe, and Warlord Skethran received a sentence unlike any other. He was taken to Elisara 4. The world he had tried to burn to nothing was being rebuilt, slowly, carefully, with the names of the dead carved into every new building, every bridge, every park. In the center of the rebuilt capital, where the university had once stood, there was now a memorial garden. 12 million names etched into walls of polished stone. 12 million lives, reduced to letters on a rock. Skethran was given a small room beside the garden. He was given tools, and he was given a task. For the rest of his natural life, he would tend the garden. He would water the plants. He would clean the stone. He would maintain the memorial to the people he had murdered. He would do this every day. He would not be allowed to leave. He would not be allowed to fight. He would not be given the warrior's death he craved. He would spend his remaining years surrounded by the names of the dead, doing the most human thing imaginable, caring for something. It was, by Vithari standards, the cruelest punishment anyone could imagine. Across the galaxy, the shock of what had happened was still settling. Species that had considered themselves powerful looked at their militaries and realized that they were nothing compared to what humanity could bring to bear. Several minor empires quietly began disarmament talks. 3 species that had been building up their forces along their borders suddenly stopped and sent diplomatic envoys to human space instead. Others reacted differently. Behind closed doors, in secret facilities, some species began weapons programs of their own. Not to attack humanity. They were not that foolish. But to ensure that if the humans ever turned their gaze elsewhere, they would not be as helpless as the Vithari had been. The Concord was broken. Not officially. The institution still existed. The council still met. Resolutions were still passed. But the moral authority that had held it together was gone. Everyone knew the truth. When the worst had happened, the Concord had done nothing. It had written a letter while children burned. No amount of reform could erase that. 3 months after the war's end, Ambassador Joreen Hale came out of retirement. He had spent the intervening weeks on Earth, in a small house by the sea, doing nothing, thinking, grieving, coming to terms with the fact that the system he had devoted his life to had failed, and that the thing that had replaced it was something he had spent 30 years trying to prevent. But he was still a diplomat. And there was one more thing he needed to say. He returned to the Concord station. He walked through corridors that had once been familiar and now felt like the hallways of someone else's house. He entered the council chamber. It was packed. Every seat was filled. Representatives from every species in the Concorde had come. Some had traveled for days. The chamber was silent, in a way it had never been before. Not the silence of boredom or routine, the silence of fear. Hale walked to the podium. His diplomatic sash was still there, folded where he had left it months ago. Nobody had touched it. He looked at it for a moment, then left it where it was. He looked out at the assembly. He was older than the last time they had seen him, thinner. But his eyes were clear, and his voice, when he spoke, was steady. "I want to tell you a story," he said. "A long time ago, on our home world, humans nearly destroyed themselves. We built weapons that could have ended all life on our planet. We pointed them at each other, and we lived that way for generations, balanced on the edge of extinction. And then, slowly, painfully, over many decades, we chose to step back from that edge. We chose to be better. We chose peace. Not because we were weak, not because we could not fight, but because we had seen what we were capable of, and it terrified us." He paused. The chamber was absolutely still. "When we came to this council 200 years ago, we made a choice to put away the things that terrified us. We chose to show the galaxy our best self, and that self was real. Every hospital we built was real. Every life we saved was real. Every treaty we negotiated, every disaster we responded to, every hand we extended in friendship, all of it was genuine. We meant it. We meant every word and every act." His voice did not waver. "But you need to understand something about us. We chose to be civilized. It was a choice we made every single day. It was not our nature. It was our aspiration. We are not a peaceful species that learned to fight. We are a violent species that learned to be peaceful. There is a difference. A very important difference. And when you showed us that civilization would not protect our children, we stopped choosing it." He let the silence hold for a long moment. "We will choose it again. We are already choosing it again. But we will never forget what we are capable of. And neither should you." He stepped back from the podium. He did not pick up the sash. He walked out of the chamber. And this time, he did not come back. Humanity rejoined the Concorde 6 months later. But the terms were different. There were no more unarmed humanitarian ships. There were no more voluntary disarmament pledges. Human warships now patrolled the borders of Concorde space, and human soldiers served as the Concorde's primary deterrent force. The gentle species had become the guardian species. The hand that once only healed now also held a sword. The galaxy was safer. Everyone knew that. The presence of the human fleet had stopped 3 potential conflicts before they started, simply because no one wanted to find out what would happen if the humans got involved. But the galaxy was also different. There was a tension that had not been there before, a wariness. The other species looked at humanity, and they saw 2 things at once: the doctors, the teachers, the builders, and behind them, in the shadow, the warships, the soldiers. The cold, efficient machine that had taken apart an empire in 19 days. Both were real. Both had always been real. The galaxy just had not wanted to see both at the same time. Admiral Maren Voss retired from the military on a quiet Tuesday. No ceremony. No speeches. She packed her uniform into a box, placed her commission papers in a drawer, and left the fleet headquarters on Mars, without looking back. She returned to Elisara 4. The planet was still healing. Construction was everywhere. New buildings rising from old ruins. New gardens growing in old craters. She walked through the rebuilt streets, and she saw children playing, and something in her chest that had been clenched tight for months finally loosened. She opened a new medical center. It was small, nothing like the grand facility that had been destroyed, but it was enough. She treated patients. She trained young doctors. She did the work she had always loved, the work she had been born for. In the bottom drawer of her desk, she kept her admiral's commission, just in case. On a warm afternoon, a year after the war, she walked past the memorial garden. Skethran was there, on his knees, pulling weeds from between the stones that bore the names of the dead. He looked up as she passed. Their eyes met. He looked old, broken, The pride that had once burned in his 4 eyes was gone. In its place was something she had not expected to see. Understanding. He said nothing. She said nothing. She walked on. At the rebuilt University of Elisara, classes had resumed. Students from across the galaxy had returned. Not as many as before, but enough. Life was continuing. The universe was turning. In a lecture hall on the 3rd floor, a young alien student, a Prelian with silver scales and wide, curious eyes, raised her hand and asked her human professor a question. "Is it true," she asked, "that humans used to be the most peaceful species in the Concord?" The professor was a middle-aged woman, with kind eyes and gray in her hair. She had survived the massacre. She had lost friends. She had watched her world burn, and had chosen to come back and teach anyway, because that was what humans did. They endured. They rebuilt. They kept going. She looked at the young alien student, and she smiled. It was a warm smile. A gentle smile. The smile of a species that had stared into the darkest parts of itself and come back carrying a light in one hand and a weapon in the other. "We still are," she said. And then, with a softness that made the young student's scales prickle with something she could not quite name, the professor added, "And that should terrify you." The student stared at her. The professor's smile did not waver. It was kind. It was genuine. And somewhere behind it, in the depth of those human eyes, there was something ancient, something vast, something that had been chained by choice and not by weakness. Outside the window, the sun was setting over Elisara 4. The sky was orange and gold, the way it had been on the morning the bombs fell. But this time, the sky was empty. No warships, no fire, just light, fading gently into night. And somewhere in orbit, invisible, silent, and always watching, a human warship turned slowly in the darkness. "Just in case,"